Hello, the Music Fan is back, and I have a couple of special guests today. Say hello.
Hi, Ryan, Kyle's brother.
Yeah, you've seen him a couple of times before on a couple of videos, and he's back to take a look at the Haken discography with me. You've seen the first two parts already, but now we're bringing out the big guns. So, how do you know Haken? Because I know you got me into it, but I wonder what you are.
My first introduction to Haken was through a review channel, actually. Cover Killer Nation was reviewing The Mountain and was absolutely raving about it, so I figured I would give it a shot, and he was 100% correct. It was awesome.
Yeah, we're on The Mountain right now, so that's a perfect segue into what we're working on today. We've already talked about Aquarius and we've talked about Visions, some pretty good albums, but this is where I feel like my brother and I feel like it's either The Mountain or Affinity. So yeah, just a couple of notes. So unlike on Aquarius and Visions, this is the first time where everyone wrote a little bit of The Mountain. Ross Jennings usually wrote all the vocals and the lyrics, and this time everyone got to pick one of their own songs and wrote lyrics to which they felt fit this narrative. The narrative itself is more about the journey of life in the allegory of a mountain. It shows because there's a lot more of a diversity in sound on this album, but we'll get to that in a second. Just going back through The Mountain, what were your first thoughts of that album?
My first thoughts was there are some really good singles on this album, but this is an album that's really meant to be sat down listened to in one setting because you really get the feel of what they are trying to convey in terms of going up to the mountain, which is the peak of your life, and then the journey back down towards death.
Mm-hmm. And it even shows on that intro song on The Path. The way that the music is created, it brings this interesting idea of these multiple paths that we go on, where the first verse is a little bit more uplifting and optimistic, and it shows in the music, whereas the second verse is more of a pessimistic side of life, and it shows in a more dissonant sound, a little bit more of a minor melody. And then the third one is a little bit more of just the ambiguity of life and knowing that there will be good and bad, but it's just the path that we take. And a lot of these ideas are thrown throughout the album, where if it's because it's there, where it brings back the idea of the path in a more of an interesting way on Falling to Earth, where it's talking about going up and then coming back down and seeing the devastation of what has happened.
Right.
There's all these really, really cool ideas thrown onto this 9-track album. And for me, and I don't know about you, but what sticks out a lot for me is not just the lyrical content, but the music itself. Where Aquarius, you have more of a long-winded album with a lot of good stuff, but it feels like they're trying to pack way too much into every song. And then you have Visions that has a more of a streamlined sound, but also sounds a lot similar because of the idea of what they're going for. This feels like they're able to experiment without throwing everything there. They have the idea of making it compact, but also spreading so many different genres.
One thing that really stands out to me is the way they're able to create atmosphere and let that carry the melody. It's very serene when it starts, and when it's getting into falling back to earth, there's something at the top where it breaks and it just really quiet and serene. It's just carried by Ross's vocals, and that just states that's the pinnacle. That's the tipping point of where the album then descends into a little bit of madness with that Falling Back to Earth song.
It's one of my highlights on the album, where it's based into two parts. It's the rise and then the fall. The story of itself is supposed to be kind of a quasi-Icarus idea, where people are trying to get to the sun, and then they get too close and they fall back to Earth. And then there's this kind of weird dystopian idea at the end of it.
Right.
But what I love about it is just the hecticness of the first part and the very tense nature of a lot of the ideas, especially in that first verse where it gets quiet and then it builds back up. And then the fall, which is the slower part, but much heavier, with beautiful harmonies and very interesting melody. To me, it's one of the major highlights on the album. There's a lot of amazing tracks, and what I love is that each one throws its own little unique thing into it, where you get the beginning track, which is a piano ballad, and then you get Atlas Stone. It's basically the more progressive out of all of them.
Yeah, it's your straightforward progressive rock track. That's what it is.
It adds so much to it, and it's a 7-minute song, and each part is very interesting.
And then you get into Cockroach Queen, which has one of the weirdest breakdowns you're going to hear in progressive metal. It has a jazz breakdown halfway through the song, and it's really kind of cool.
But I love, like, at first that was my favorite song when I first heard this album, and my brother was like, of course it is. Because
I know, what's the jazz head.
But I think what I love about it is not just the interesting a cappella parts or the interesting jazz parts. It's how strangely dissonant everything is, how sludgy it all feels, but it feels awesome. Just like the fact that all the harmonies are very dissonant at parts, and then you get that fast paced, and you get to the Searching for the Truth where it's that do 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 do, and it's like just really weird, really dissonant sound, but it sounds really cool, and it fits that whole entire idea of what they're trying to go for. This really depraved song about greed and avarice on the way of life.
Right.
And then you get a song like In Memoriam, which is also phenomenal in parts and shows off this really interesting harmonies at the end. You can go through every song and find something interesting. And at first, when I talked to my brother, I said it was a paint by numbers progressive album, only because of the idea, like, it throws some interesting, like, each song throws something interesting that you would hear in a progressive album. But I think each song does it so well that it's not a paint by numbers. This is the album that I wanted from Aquarius, where they were throwing a lot of stuff in there, but they now can pick and choose where they're throwing everything.
I never thought it was a paint by numbers album. I'm just going to throw that out there. I do not share that opinion in the least bit. Never have, never will.
That's fair. So, I mean, I guess the question for me is, what makes this album stand out in the progressive scene for you?
First off, Ross Jennings' vocals are fantastic on this album. That's something that really does it for me. One thing that's always bothered me about a band like Dream Theater is that the vocals are a little too cheesy for my liking during some songs. But Ross has a really good tone, really good control of breath, so it doesn't sound like his notes are being forced. Very tight musicianship, and I keep going back to the atmosphere that this album sets. You can just throw it on. This album you can fall asleep to. Seriously. It's like, that's how serene in some parts of the album is, where it can literally just, you can put it on and just fall asleep because it's so nice and so peaceful.
I get that. Like, it was weird when you first said that, because, like, I'm thinking Falling Back to Earth, but what is literally the next song, as Death Embraces, is another just highlight showing Ross's voice off. It's another simple piano ballad, but it's a beautifully created one, and it shows off Ross Jennings' high range and just like vulnerability on that song, where it's talking about the idea of death and leaving somebody behind. It's just a phenomenal little interlude into the next song. Now, I will say the one thing that I feel a little bit weird on this album is that next song. Only because it feels a little bit different from everything else and doesn't really follow that narrative.
Which song, Periodalia?
Yeah, Periodalia.
That's probably my favorite track on the album.
Really?
That's probably my favorite track on the album. I just love the opening guitar riff to it. I love how it sets up. It reminds me a lot of a song that they do on their following album, The Endless Nun. It has that very kind of, I'm not going to say it's dubstep because I know it's a tone they're making on the guitar, but it has a really cool, crunchy guitar riff. Ross's vocals are really good on it. There's a little bit of reverb on his vocals that they add to it to make it sound the way it does. And then in the middle, there's this really cool guitar tapping sequence where they get a showcase. They're really, right there.
Yep.
What he's doing, and the showcases. I think it's the most technically proficient song they have on the album. So that's what I like about that.
So it's interesting that you brought up Dream Theater, because when I hear this song, I think of a couple certain songs on a Dramatic Turn of Events, like Gone Not Forgotten, or like any of these ones that use kind of this Middle Eastern kind of sound to it, and kind of like on Dramatic Turn of Events, it's a very proficient song. I think why I think is one of the weaker is not the right word, but one of the not as perfect as the other ones, is because it feels a little bit aimless at times, which I understand it's the idea of the song. It's a person looking for oasis after like their kingdom is gone, but at points it feels like the do 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 do, like that vocal part like kind of goes on a little bit too long.
I disagree, but we're gonna leave that alone
for
now.
That's fair.
I said, for me, it's their technical proficiency on that album, and that song in general is why it stands out to me as being the best on the album.
Another one that feels a little bit too long is Somebody, It's weird. Actually, if you go through on the deluxe version of the album, there's nobody.
Which I like better.
I do too,
I like
because
better.
I think Somebody goes a little bit too long.
And you can probably cut it about 2 or 3 minutes.
Exactly. The Somebody is 9 minutes long, and Nobody is about
5.
Yeah.
It's about 5.
So I think if you're going to listen to that track, listen to Nobody.
Mm-hmm.
At first, I didn't like that song at all, and then it grew on me.
Nobody?
Somebody. I felt like it was a weird ender to the album, but...
What about didn't you like it at first? Was it Ross's vocals, the vocal pattern he was using on the song?
It was a little bit of that. It was also just, it didn't feel like it fit the vibe of everything else. But as I listened to it more and more, I found it to be a highlight of the album because I do love the melody line on there. I love the idea of in the bridge where he's saying, I wish I could be somebody, but he keeps changing the rhythm of it so that he's doing it like on different parts. Or like, I wish that I could be somebody, I wish I could be and just the way that the timing works around it is a really cool idea. And I like the darkness of that song
too. Especially when the lyrics, give me back my life to prove that I can fight.
Yeah.
I love that line. It fits the mode of that song.
It's the closing song, and it's talking about this person's kind of dying breaths and dying wishes of like, give me a chance to prove myself again.
Yeah.
And when he realizes that he can't do that, he's kind of mourning the idea that he wished he could have been somebody.
Right.
Which is a very poignant song without using a lot of technicality in it. Like an album that has so much technical prowess throughout it has a lot of really cool parts where it's very simple but very effective.
And that's part of what makes a good album is you don't always need your instruments to carry a message. If you can write poignant lyrics and have a singer who can convey that through his singing, that emotion through his singing, that's going to take you a long way.
Mm-hmm. This is by far the album where you have the shorter songs. If you go back to Visions, you got a 22-minute song. If you go back to Aquarius, you have songs that are like 13 minutes, 17 minutes. The longest song in this album is Falling Back to Earth. And it's
about 12 and a half, maybe?
About
12.
Yeah. So you're talking about more bite-sized songs that are proved effective, and this is where I think they took every idea of what they've learned from Visions and Aquarius and made it amazing. I've talked about a couple of negatives, if you will. Is there anything to you that stands out as something that...
In terms of a negative?
Or something that you wish was a little bit better?
It's really hard because it's a really, really strong album. The bass isn't as prevalent as I would like it to be. It's kind of buried in the mix a little bit. And there are some songs where Ross's vocals seemed a little overproduced. And that's what progressive music in general. But other than that, those two nitpicks and like saying maybe cut somebody down by 2.5 to 3 minutes. Other than that, it's pretty damn good.
It's an
I don't know if you agree with anything that I just said.
I mean, yeah, I think that I don't think of a lot of the bass when I think about this album. The only time I really can think of like bass part is right in that middle of Because It's There. Mm-hmm. But that to me is also one of the weaker tracks. Not in the beginning. I love the idea of the beginning where they take this melody line from The Path and you then add another voice on for each verse, and it changes the dynamic, the chord color, everything. I thought that was a really cool idea. I honestly think the rest of the arrangement is a little bit blah, especially with those like glitch drums, and it just doesn't stand out to me as one of the amazing tracks. But again, like I said, all these tracks have something memorable to it, and that's what I love about this album, is that I can listen to this album over and over again and pick out something new, or like just hone in onto something that is just incredible to me. I don't go to it honestly as much as the next album we'll talk about, but
that's probably because in terms of the next album, it's easier to pick out songs on the album you can listen to. This one is really kind of meant more to listen to in one sitting and really digest the meaning of the album.
I mean, that's all I can say. I think are both in agreement of just in terms of the 3 albums so far: Aquarius, Visions, Mountain. By far, this is the best of the 3.
This is the album that put Haken on the map, and really expanded their worldwide appeal to more fans, and that's why they're called the next Dream Theater by a lot of fans, that they're going to carry the torch of progressive rock / metal into the future.
I'm curious because we didn't get to touch on it. in terms of Visions, in terms of Aquarius, if you were to rank all three so far, because right now mine is Mountain first, Vision second, Aquarius 3.
That'd be mine.
Mm-hmm.
That's sounds about right.
Mm-hmm.
You can switch Visions and Aquarius, but at this point, Mountain is just so much better than any of those two so far
Mm-hmm.
that fighting for second place at this point is kind of meaningless for them, just because the Mountain is their crowning achievement, and it's really hard to get to that level again when you're a musician.
That's fair. It's basically the best so far. The only question is it better than Affinity? But you'll have to wait until next week to find that out. Until then, if you like what we're doing, of course, like the video. Of course, if you love the Mountain, tell us what you love about it, what you hate about it. Share this with your friends, subscribe to my channel, and just keep on watching my videos. I'll have a couple of other reviews this week, and then next week, stay tuned for part 4 of this. But until then, this is the Music Fan signing off.